Okay, guys, we are doing Chapter 9. We're going to be talking about squares and square roots and how we relate some of our algebra to some geometry. Let me close that little guy that came to visit us. Okay, goodbye. There we go. All right, squares and square roots. We're going to find out what squares and square roots are. There should be a little bit of review for you guys, but we're going to fine-tune our skills with this, and we're going to learn what a perfect square is, what a square root, and what a radical is. And we will do that in the next pages. All right, just to review, a square is the product of a number multiplied by itself. So the product, right, guys? So 6 times 6 is 36. So 36 is the square, right? To find the square root of something, we're going to be doing that. Just keep that in mind. Okay, let's think about this. But before we get to that, let's talk about perfect squares. Perfect squares are numbers like 20, 25, oops, sorry. Here we go. 25, 49, 169, and 225. They are squares of whole numbers. Squares of whole numbers. So a perfect square, this is your definition. The first definition, your perfect square are squares of whole numbers. So 25 is a perfect square because 5 times 5, or 5 squared, is 25. 49 is a perfect square because it is the product of 7 times 7. 169 is a perfect square because 13 times 13 is 169. 225 is a perfect square because 15 times 15 is 225. Square roots. Okay, I'm going to slide this down a little bit if I can. I don't like how high up it is. There we go. Square roots. Okay, a square root is a number, one of the two equal factors of the number. So, for example, if we have the square root 64, if we have 64 as a number and we want to find the square root of it, that square root, it is 8. It is one of the factors that are equal to each other of 64. So 64, as you know, is 8 times 8. So the square root of 64 is 8. We said it again here. So let me say that again. 8 times 8 is 64. So 8 is the square root of 64. And this symbol right here, that highlighter gone, this symbol right here is the symbol for square root, and it's called a radical sign. So here's your third definition. A radical sign is what we use to indicate a square root when we want to find the square root of something. Square root is one of the two digits that you can factor, or let's say it's one of the two factors of the given number. So what if we had the number, well, let's do 169. What if we had the number 169? We wanted to find the square root of that. We'd have to think we actually are going to punch these mostly into our calculator, but some of them we'll do in our head. What are two factors of 169? 13 and 13. And since they're the same, the square root of 169 will be just 13. So we're going to be finding the square root. So the square root, let's look at problem A. Square root of 36. Okay, so what's the positive square root of 36? And since 6 times 2 is 36, the square root of 36 is 6. It's pretty easy, right, guys? Now here we have a negative square root of 81. Notice the negative sign is outside the square root. That's important. It is the negative square root of 81 that we're looking for. It is not the square root of negative 81. That is something totally different. We're talking about when the negative sign is outside the square root. So notice that detail. All right, since 9 squared is 81, the negative square root of 81 will be negative 9. Thinking that negative and the square root of 81 is negative, all right? Sometimes it'll indicate that it wants both. Oops, hold on. What did I do? Okay, sorry. Sometimes it'll indicate that it wants both square roots, plus or minus the square root of 9. Well, we know 3 times 3, we know that 3, oh, goodness gracious, sorry guys, this is guys being goofy here. Let's try this again. 3 squared is 9, right? We know that 3 times 3 is 9. What about 3, negative 3 times negative 3? Or negative 3 squared, right? What does that equal? What's negative 3 times negative 3? It's also a positive 9. So you can have plus or minus the square root of 9. It can be plus 3 or it can be negative 3. All right. You can also use your calculator to find square roots. Yay, everybody's happy, right? Calculator. Okay. And all you do is you enter the second button on your calculator. Say we're finding the square root of 10. You enter your second button, you tap your second button, hit your square root button, hit 10, and hit enter. And there's your answer. And then it will ask you to round to the nearest tenth, say. And if it asks you to round to the nearest tenth, you will write approximately, notice the change in sign from equals to approximately 3.2. Same with the next one. B, negative the square root of 27. So you'll hit the second button, square root, number 27, and then you'll hit enter, and you'll get an answer that is negative because the negative sign is outside the square root of 27, right? And you'll get, there'll be no square root sign. You'll get some decimal. And what is negative? What's the square root of 27? Well, let me open my handy dandy calculator and tell you that is sorry about that. I had to go get my calculator from the desk. So that is 5.19, 5.196. 5.196. And if it asks me to round it to the nearest tenth, that's going to be negative 5.2. Sometimes you use square roots to solve problems. Here we find, if you look over here under the science section, okay, we find to estimate how far you can see from a point above the horizon, you can use the formula. D equals 1.2 times the square root of A. So that's going to be our formula we're going to be using in this section. We'll use it actually in some of your practice problems. D is the distance in miles. This is the distance in miles, right? And A is the altitude. You know what altitude is? It's the height of something. And H is the height. Excuse me. A is the altitude and height, which is in feet, okay? So first step you're going to do, let's read our problem. The light on Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in North Carolina is 208 feet high. On a clear day, from about what distance on the ocean is the light visible? On a clear day, how far out are you when you can see this light on Cape Hatteras? Have any of you been to the Cape Hatteras to see this famous lighthouse? And then they want us to round it to the nearest 10. Okay. So what do we know from this problem? we have? We know that the altitude or the height is 208 feet. So the D is going to equal 1.22 times, I don't like using X for that, but 1.2 times the square root of A. D equals 1.22 times what's A? 208 feet, the square root of 208 feet. So on your calculator, you would find out what the square root of 208 is. And if you did, you would find out it is 14.42. Notice that it's asked me to round to the nearest tenth, but I have rounded my square root to the nearest hundredth. When I get to my answer, I need hundredth places so that when I get to my final answer, I can round to the tenth. I'll do that at the last stop. So then I will multiply 14.42, which is the square root of 208, times 1.22. I find out that it is approximately, and it is an approximate, 17.5924, right? And rounded to the nearest tenth, that would D would be approximately 17.6. 17.6 what, guys? Miles, that's right. Questions? Anything you have questions on? Make a note. Ask me in our next class on Monday. And here are a few guided practice problems for you. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. Problem number 11 asks you to refer to the last example we did. You're going to use the formula D equals 1.22 times the square root of the altitude or the height. So that's what you'll need for this last problem. All right, good luck with it, and see you on Monday.